Welcome to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I'm Melissa Joy, a certified financial planner and the founder of Pearl Planning. My goal is to help you streamline and organize your finances, navigate big money decisions with confidence, and be strategic in order to grow your wealth. As a woman, you work hard for your money, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Now, let's get into the show. Welcome back to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I bet most of you have heard of a prenup, but I don't know if you're like me, how much time you've spent thinking about it and discussing it in practical manner. But today, that's what we're going to be talking about. And you might be surprised. This could apply to yourself or to the next generation in your family. So I think it's going to be a fun and informative discussion. And to have this discussion, I'm joined by Kaylin Dillon. Kaylin is a certified financial planner and a fee-only financial planner based in Lawrence, Kansas. She runs Kaylin Dillon Financial Planning, where she specializes in working with couples navigating separate assets, blended finances, and prenuptial agreements. She's also the author of Prenup Partnership, a guide to getting a prenup you both love, and the creator of the Prenup Coach, an educational brand helping engaged couples approach prenups as a team. Kaylin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, you are the prenup expert I know, which I kind of met you following your reels on Instagram. Great work.
Thank you.
Give me a little bit of a background. How did you choose to dive so deep into this very specific, very important topic?
Yeah. Well, when I first started my financial planning business, I really wanted to focus my work on doing financial planning for couples with separate assets because that's how my husband and I, at least to some extent, manage our assets.
Okay.
And and at first, I was like, how do I communicate that to people? Because people really define separate assets very differently. And I
Mhm.
thought, well, we have a prenup that actually did lay a lot of the foundation work for what we do treat separately and what we treat jointly. So I thought, well, that would be another good focus for my financial planning practice. And so my intention was for most of my focus to be on the financial planning side. But as soon as I started talking online, on social media, in public about prenups, I started getting a lot of inquiries from people asking for just some guidance on the front end of considering a prenup. And at first I was like, well, that's not really what I do. But I realized after getting enough of these, I realized, I did go through this process. I do have at least some advice for these individuals reaching out to me and couples reaching out to me. And so I started kind of, just dipping my toe into giving people some pointers, and then it really took off from there and has become, a, yeah, a main specialty of mine.
Well, I love that. Sometimes there's a need in the universe and you're called to fill it.
Yeah.
I guess we should start at the basics. I know that the term prenuptial agreement is in, kind of common American vernacular, but can you define what a prenuptial agreement is?
Yeah. It's just a legal contract that takes effect upon marriage. And that's really the basis of it. So it, in theory, does not always have to do with divorce, but of course, most of the time, a prenuptial agreement does spell out how a couple would split their assets if they were to divorce. But there are all sorts of other things you can include in it too. Um, and, we can get into that.
I bet we'll get into that in a moment. In the meantime, who drafts a prenup? Like where do you go if you want one or need one?
In an ideal world, please go to an attorney, a family law attorney specifically, because divorce attorneys are the ones they're the closest to the case law when it comes to prenups, and so they're the best ones to be drafting this. Sometimes people use an estate planning attorney. That can be okay depending on your situation, but if you're just starting out fresh and wondering who to look for, you want to look for a family law attorney, and you do each need to hire your own attorney. And then there are online options for people who really are averse to going that route, but I still recommend hiring an attorney to review if say if you use Hello Prenup, which is the only one I'm familiar enough with that I really like and support. I would even if you went that route, I would still hire attorneys afterwards to review it.
And if we can pause here for a moment, why would you each so there's always I would assume there's always 2 parties in a prenup. Why would both of you need separate attorneys?
You need separate I mean, practically, you need separate attorneys so that you can be advised by your own attorney about what's in your best interest individually, because that's their job.
Mhm.
But you also ideally want to each hire your own attorneys because that also helps solidify the validity of the prenup. And in some states, that's explicitly required. In some states, there is a lot more wiggle room than that. But even in the states where it's not explicitly required, I still highly suggest it. And I do think it's really important that you that the individuals making this agreement do privately get advised on what's in their best interest, so you kind of understand, like, how far could I take this agreement under the law if I'm only looking out for me? But in the end, you're not going to end up with an agreement that's only looking out for one person, for a whole host of reasons. That's not a fun way to start a marriage, and, it could be considered an unfair, um, prenuptial agreement. So, yeah, I could go on for a while, but I really strongly recommend each hiring your own attorney, which is a little bit daunting for individuals. And so that's why doing some of the planning work on the front end, even if it's not a full financial plan, just planning for the prenup itself can really help people feel ready for hiring the attorneys and starting that process because it can be intimidating.
Absolutely, and you mentioned it in your previous response, but with the law, when it comes to family law, state by state matters. So, if you have a family member who's an attorney in California and you're sitting in where you live, Kaylin, in Kansas, not the same law.
No.
And so you really need someone who is familiar with the state that you are residing in, which is where the
Uh-huh.
contract would be. An additional consideration too is hopefully the prenup is happening in a very happy day for the happy couple. But you need to consider all sorts of outcomes and situations.
Yeah.
Um, and it's nice to hopefully have clear weather on that day as you're considering the future, but oftentimes it's the job of the attorney, I would assume, to inform you of how the agreement would work in the event of a divorce, in the event of, other disagreements or feuds, so that you're and also, shifting, financial, power in the relationship as well.
Yeah.
All of these are considerations that, counsel, whether it's an attorney and or a financial planner, can help to make you aware of.
Yes. I really like how you put that, actually. I'm going to steal some of that.
Please do. So, okay, so we've laid out what a prenup is and functionally, like I agreed. Like, please do not do this. This is not a DIY project. And I'm interested in hearing about Hello Prenup, but also human advice can give you a lot of information and human communication as well. Someone who understands your situation, not a conversation with ChatGPT, can
Right.
is really important in terms of counsel, and that's why I'm sure, Kaylin, that the work that you're doing is so popular on this area. Um, so let's get in. So what gets put into a prenup? Like, I'm sure there's some basics that we all understand, but
Yeah.
like, what types of agreements or arrangements are potentially in there?
The most common plain vanilla prenup usually says it usually has rules for what you already own right now. And sometimes that kind of is it. And so if you own or owe, so maybe you have debts, one of you has debt and one of you owns significant assets. It would spell out how would those assets or debt be treated if you were to get divorced. But you can also include terms in your prenup around things that don't exist yet. So it could be if you don't own a business now to list in the assets in your prenup, you could still include provisions that spell out what would happen with a business if one of you were to start a business in the future.
Mhm.
So if that's something that's on your mind, that's something I see from time to time. Um, but it's all about what you own right now, what you owe right now, and then what you may want to address in the future. So if you don't already own a home, you're both renting, but you're already basically planning to purchase a home, it would be a good idea to have some provisions around how to treat the home. Um, and then you can also include provisions around how you want to manage your finances during marriage. So it could be, for instance, my prenup requires my husband carry life insurance.
Mm,
And so it could be just something that's taking place during your marriage. It could spell out how you're going to split taxes if you have significantly different income levels. You may want something there. Um, or I have seen people spell out, how they want to split expenses. Of course, you can probably tell as I'm starting to list out some of the possibilities. There's kind of a long list. Um, the possibility list is very long, and I
mhm.
don't want people to look at it as a menu where they're just trying to like pick out everything possible they think might be relevant. You really want to start first with what's your actual goal for the agreement, what are you trying to accomplish here? And really try to stay focused on that so that you don't get carried away because including too much in a prenup can actually just make your life a little more difficult later, especially if you start to get into the territory of like rules that govern how you manage your finances during marriage. You have to stick to those. So, you want to give
Be
yourself plenty of
practical.
flexibility. Yeah.
So just, pulling out some examples, perhaps, people are getting married later in life, and so you come into the marriage, you each have your own financial history, you have your own assets, you have your own debts, you have your own stream of income, um, and so, basically, one function or perhaps the most basic would be, "Here's the assets I'm bringing into the marriage, here's the debts, here's, each of yours, they're detailed, and those assets could be, um, yours, like, stated that they're yours and separate
Hmm.
property. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. They can say that what each of us is bringing is ours separately and will always be our separate property. And maybe you already own something together. So you may still have something listed in there that is actually from the outset already labeled as marital property, or if you're in a community property state, you call it community property. But um, when it comes to how you divide assets, there's not actually a significant difference in the two.
Makes
Um, yeah.
makes
And you
sense.
also reminded me one other thing. You can include terms around what you want to happen to your assets when you die. So you can have estate terms in there, um, essentially instead of a will, or it could just be over something, one specific thing. So the thing I see most frequently in that case is a marital home.
Mm,
In the case that you have children from a previous marriage, sometimes people
mhm,
want to be able to, especially if it was a family home, they may want to be able to keep that in their family, that sort of thing. So you could have estate terms in your prenup, and it may or may not be the case that you still need a will after that.
mhm.
Usually you do to kind of cover everything else.
Makes sense. Um, that's really helpful. And, in thinking about the prenup as well, I was just thinking as an aside, it's always super helpful, even if you're not going to go down the route of a prenup, to have an asset inventory prior to your marriage. Because in most places that I can think of, the assets you bring into a marriage are often considered separate property, but only if you have information and proof that they existed at that time,
Yeah.
and in many cases aren't commingled with your marital assets. So,
Yeah. That's
um,
right.
you know, many people will never have to argue that in court, but for those that end up in a divorce situation that's relevant, so it's a good thing to, kind of make up the list when you start. And I think another, reason that I've heard a desire for prenups, is there, could be inherited wealth on one or both sides of the family. These are typically inherited assets are typically considered separate, but it gets sticky in the day-to-day maintenance of life, for keeping things separate. Can you talk to me? Do you have people that come to you and it's like mom and dad say, we have to have a prenup, and so we need advice, or give me a little bit of flavor on the family assets or
Yeah.
generational assets.
Yeah, I definitely have had people come to me and they're getting a prenup because they're told they have to, or because one
Mhm.
side of the family has told them they have to. Um, and that can be just because they're going to inherit significant wealth and the family just wants to be sure that it's extra clear, even though,
Mhm.
like you said, in most states, inherited assets are protected as separate property. There is quickly some quite a bit of gray area, especially if you've inherited assets and you're using it to support your marital life, or you've inherited assets and you're living in, say, a home that you inherited, something like that. There can really quickly be gray area, and so sometimes families want that reassurance, which I think it's really important to acknowledge how understandable that is. That
Mhm.
one family has built up this wealth, and it's not so much that they want to make sure this new person entering their family doesn't get anything, but they do want to make sure this money is staying in their family because all of many families have heard, families who have built up significant wealth probably have heard stories, if not already experienced cases in their own family where someone did get divorced and it felt like a significant amount of family money went to this ex-spouse who now is not in the family and maybe, you know, isn't even supporting a grandchild or somebody
Mhm.
who's, they're really truly no longer in the family, and the family left behind feels like it was unfair for whatever reason. It can also be the case, like if there's a family business, then it's especially important for them because they don't want to end up being business partners with the ex spouse of their family member. So their,
Mhm.
ex daughter in law. That it just doesn't make for a very fun experience to be business partners. So you do need some clear rules around how those assets would be treated if you were to split. Um, but then, of course, it is also really important for the entering spouse to have some provisions that protect them as well. So we could get into that. But yes, significant wealth is a really common reason.
So true, and, then you can imagine how it gets complicated. First of all, I appreciate, like, how you shared Kaylin, like, it's not a personal affront in most cases. I don't wanna obviously, this is not a blanket statement, but
Sure,
it's
that's true.
typically not a, "We don't like her or him." It's more, and often, the family or the family member or the the fiancé is getting counsel, from professionals saying, "Hey, this is something you need to discuss and consider." Um, and also, though, when entering into those, some of the unforeseen complications could be, what if, you know, the one spouse quits working, but most of the assets are behind a separate property door. There's so many different, kind of permutations of outcomes eventually that you do need that counsel. And that's probably one of the other reasons that prenups are, I believe, in most states considered to be less defensible or more prone to invasion if you're kind of if it's at the wedding that you're signing the document, or right before
Sure.
the weekend of the
Yeah.
wedding. You need some space and time and counsel so that it's not, like being held over your head when you actually tie the knot.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I thought maybe you were about to say if they're unfair, but actually,
True. That
that's
too.
not. I mean, in most states, it takes it the prenup has to rise to the level of being unconscionable. So it actually I said earlier on something about it being unfair. That's actually not the line. The line is unconscionable, which is quite high. And there are a lot of prenups that get held up that to all of us would look very unfair, especially after knowing, maybe the couple's circumstances, someone did leave their career, etc. Um, and those are held up. But you're right that the amount of time before getting married is important, although most states, um, 30 days is most attorneys would tell you if it's at least 30 days, it's probably fine,
Yeah.
which to me is way too short. I mean, that's way too short. You really have to start the process way, way before that to give it the kind of care and attention that it needs.
Great advice. And yeah, I would just mention, like, usually it is what it is after you've signed it. Maybe in those very disparate situations, there would be like different considerations for spousal or child support because of disparities that wouldn't necessarily be like pre-committed. But yeah,
Yeah,
just a lot to consider. Like you're not going to go and renegotiate it in most cases. Um, so tell me a little bit more about some of the, kind of interesting narratives or perspectives. Do most people that engage you, kind of come with both people like fully on board, or is one person more skeptical? Um, yeah, what are your real life experiences with prenups?
yeah. I think there's a fair amount of self-selection happening.
Mhm.
And so usually by the time couples come to me, they're at least both open to the idea, or open to considering a prenup. I'm not sure that's representative of the total population, but,
That's
um,
probably I
yeah.
mean, if you go to the length of both hiring an attorney as well as hiring a prenup coach like yourself who has the financial planning background, it's probably more of an ideal, thoughtful, slower situation than
Yeah,
average.
or it is the case that a family member has said, "You have to get a prenup if you want to inherit assets from
Mm,
your family," and the couple is thinking, "Okay, well, how do we this sounds really intimidating, how do we make this a better experience?"
that's
And
great.
so that's where I can really support the couple. The best part about my job is that I can meet with the couple together. Your
Mhm.
attorneys, unless you're going through a collaborative process, which is actually a fine
A thing.
solution. Yeah, that is a thing. And if you're going through a collaborative prenup process, you actually meet as a group. You each have your own attorney there, but you're only meeting in groups and you basically commit to that. You don't have individual meetings. It's not my favorite because, like I said earlier, I do love the idea that each person is getting advised individually and kind of can ask the really uncomfortable things that might sound offensive to their soon to be spouse. Um, Kind of ask some of the what ifs that they may not be comfortable bringing up together. But yes, that's an option. But also, if you've hired separate attorneys and you're meeting separately, I can still be one help meeting with you to talk about your goals for the prenup and kind of help you stay focused on what the purpose of this is and reminding the couple to stay on the same page before going to their attorneys so that they're not having a lot of back and forth, which is unpleasant when you're communicating between attorneys, but it's also much more expensive.
Makes sense. What do people do wrong when they approach the prenup process? What are the no-nos?
The main bad practices that I see all fall under that umbrella of rushing the process, and they include things like hiring the attorneys and starting the process before you've actually gotten on the same page
Mm,
about your goals for the prenup. So if anyone listening is planning to get a prenup, the number one thing you have to know to do is talk to each other
mhm.
first and have a clear bullet point list of like, here are our goals for the prenup. Don't use any legal language because you'll get it wrong anyway. Just totally plain language. Like, I want to protect, that my investment accounts or my business or the home ownership that I already have before we get married, um, things like that, and list that out together before you start the process with attorneys. And ideally, I like for couples to focus on their plan A first, which is financial plan, a joint financial plan they do together. How are we going to manage finances going forward in terms of cash flow, splitting expenses? What are our goals long term? What are our savings goals for those goals? Um, and that way, that kind of lay that I mean that lays a lot of the foundation, that plan A for the prenup, which is usually only a plan B. Um, and it's different, when you rush the process, you skip all of those first
Yeah.
things. How do you know what rules you want around your assets and, say, your income in a prenup if you haven't figured out how you're going to split expenses?
Mhm.
And just kind of who's if one of you owns the home, who's covering which type of home expenses, whether it's maintenance or repairs, or if it's just the mortgage and utilities. Like, those are important things to flesh out before you're deciding who has what percentage of ownership of the house in a prenup.
So true. And it's just so interesting. There's so many different considerations, but the number one is, like, have a good foundation. I think also you mentioned, Kaylin, for you and your spouse, your some of your finances are separate in
Mhm.
within your um, marital household. Can you describe a little bit about uh, like I've had full ranges of separate versus everything's ours. Um, the one I find hardest to deal with or almost impossible is like where there's, like, no give, like, it's like, "Here's the bill for dinner last night," or no information, because eventually you're often or almost exclusively planning for some shared goals, at least, for example,
Yeah.
retirement, and so that communication that you were describing as being fundamental to the start of the prenup process is also necessary even if things are very separate.
Yes. Yeah. So no information is really impossible. And
Not my
if it,
preferred
I mean, how do you
clients.
do any,
Yeah.
there's no joint financial planning
Yeah.
happening there. I have worked with couples who, track their expenses on a monthly basis. They are splitting them based on a certain percentage, and they are reconciling at the end of every month with a Venmo.
Mhm.
And
I love
that
joint accounts for
can
joint
work.
expenses too, even if you have separate accounts for
Definitely.
every
I totally
else,
agree.
l
I totally agree. It's much better to fund that joint account at that ratio, that percentage ratio, and then use that for just because it's easier.
Mhm.
But if for whatever reason that is important to a couple and that doesn't feel too tedious to them, like, more power to them.
Mhm.
And the couples I've worked with who do it that way insist they're happy with it. And so I give them my blessing.
That's great, like, I'm not here to judge, but there is the one, like, if you're completely separate and there's no information, but you're also on the hook for the other person if they haven't figured their half
Yeah.
out, it makes me
Or they're
really
building up
nervous.
debt that you don't know
Yeah.
about, or, signing, personal guarantees on some business investment that you don't even understand is happening.
Yeah, businesses are
Those
big
all affect you.
biggies where you can
Mhm.
your personal balance sheet can be really harmed by a business balance sheet because it's very difficult to, secure debt outside of personal
Yeah.
guarantees. Um,
But this is what the beauty of a prenup
right.
or a postnup. That would be a great argument. Like, if you're in that situation, you're like, "I don't have the visibility that I want." It could be that somebody is just, like, needing that protection, like, they're withholding information because they need the reassurance that this business is protected. Like, put that in an agreement. Like, give that person that assurance. I mean, assuming that you can make an agreement that's fair enough. But, like, give them that reassurance so that you can have transparency. That's the ideal path so that you can talk openly about what you each have.
Have you read Strangers by Bell Burden?
It's on my list. I already downloaded it and I'm going on a trip in a week and a half, so I'll be reading it for sure. I've heard a lot about
Highly recommend, just for spoiler alert for listeners, this is a memoir by a a generational wealth a woman who inherited generational wealth, but it's about her marriage and I would call a character in the memoir is the prenup, signed, against her, attorneys and advice in a way that, is becomes very important as her marriage dissolves. Great audio listen. That's what I did. So Kaylin, you're going to enjoy reading the book, especially but professionally, but it's just a very engaging book. But that book is all about what happens when you get divorced and have a prenup. I hope all the marriages have worked out with your clients. Have you gotten any feedback from people who did get married and then ended up dissolving their marriage? Um, in your
I I have no confirmation of any of my prenup couples getting divorced. It may happen. I'm sure that it will, just statistically speaking, but, no, but I've certainly assisted with a large number of divorces.
part and
It
parcel.
is just a fact of
Yeah.
life, yes, part of being a financial planner.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just so, it's nice to have the pre-discussion because I also have quite a few divorce discussions, having previously had my CDFA and focused on that area. They never kind of go away after you start working with divorces. But, I know there's a lot of people that, kind of wish they'd had the foresight to have both those, like, collaborative communications when it comes to money with spouses and partners, as well as, at least consideration, and not everyone needs a prenup, it's not required, but consideration, when you, enter, a contract like marriage is.
Yeah, yeah.
How can people stay tuned for, more that work that you're doing in this space, and where can people find you, Kaylin?
They can find me at the Prenup Coach on Instagram. That's where I am most frequently, and all of my resources and, uh, services are at kaylindillon.com.
Awesome. Well, it was so nice to meet you, and thank you for doing such important work in kind of exposing a very interesting and relevant topic. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Women's Money Wisdom podcast. If you found value in this episode, the best way that you can support the podcast is to forward an episode to a friend or leave a review. Go to proplan.com and the podcast link to get all the resources and links mentioned. This presentation by Pro Planning is intended for general information purposes only. No portion of this presentation serves as a receipt of or a substitute for personal investment advice from Pro Planning or any other investment professional of your choosing. Copies of Pro Planning's current written disclosure brochure and Form CRS discussing our advisory services and fees are available upon request or on our website platform at pearlplan.com. The information that we share is meant to educate and inspire, not serve as personalized financial advice. Everyone's situation is unique, so be sure to consult with your own financial professional for guidance that fits your life. And just so you know, the opinions shared in this podcast are Melissa's own and those of her guests. They don't necessarily represent any organizations with which Melissa is affiliated. For more important disclosures, please go to our webpage at pearlplan.com.